It's time for the SportsNaut interview. Newsmakers and record breakers from around the world of sports. Join us in conversation. The latest in sports talk from the editors at SportsNaut.com. And now, the SportsNaut interview.
Welcome to the SportsNaut interview, everyone. I am your host, Evan Grote, and I'm happy to have you all joining me here today. We are going to stay on the theme that we were on last week. We're going to continue to talk about Major League Baseball. We are continuing to inch closer and closer to the start of spring training when pitchers and catchers report in February. Now, if you live on the East Coast like I do in the Northeast, and you're just getting pounded with snow and cold temperatures, it's hard to even think about baseball right now, but I know I'm getting excited, and it's at least on my radar right now. And so I'm excited to speak with our guest here this week. We're joined by a good friend of the show, Gabe Lacques, who is a USA Today baseball writer, reporter, and he always does a great job for us. He's always very generous with his time, and we thank you once again, Gabe.
Appreciate it. Good to be back for sure.
Yeah, it's been a very active week in baseball. So let's jump right into it. Let's get into some of these topics. I want to first start with the New York Mets. Now, early in the winter, they were getting ridiculed a bit from their fan base for maybe a lack of activity. Of course, they lost Pete Alonso. They lost Edwin Diaz. Most recently, they were kind of left at the altar with Kyle Tucker, who we know ended up signing with the Dodgers on that mega deal. But they've pivoted, they've rebounded a bit, and they've went out and they've signed a bunch of guys. Most recently, Bichette, of course. They got the trade done for Freddy Peralta, Luis Roberts, and Devin Williams, Polanco, and so on and so forth. So they've been active. But what I want to ask you and what I want to get your opinion on is when you look at the totality of what they were able to accomplish, do you think the Mets are a better team right now? And of course, we're talking on paper. There's been no games, but on paper, do they look like a better team now than they did last year? And do you think that David Stearns accomplished what he set out to do this offseason?
Yeah, I would say yes to both of those. It's interesting. Nobody really wins the winter meetings. It's just a chunk of of the offseason period. So you say goodbye to Pete Alonso. You lose out on Edwin Diaz. Devin Williams doesn't necessarily look like an automatic lockdown guy. So right at that point in time, looked a little bit grim for sure. But you look at just overall, not just who they got, but the positions that they'll be in. I guess I'll start with the bad news first, if you will. I wasn't really blown away with the Jorge Polanco move. Mm-hmm. Coming as it did also as the first sort of recovery from the losses that they had. So it looked really kind of iffy at the time. In a vacuum, though, like he's 33. His offensive production hasn't entirely been linear per se. He's had some injury woes and stuff. So you go out and get him to play first base largely. It seemed a little odd to me, but everything else really kind of worked out really nicely. And I think they did need to change the mojo. To whatever extent there was. Any sort of just poor chemistry in the clubhouse or whatever, just from the playing field standpoint, the way it all turned out really worked out well. Marcus Semien really is a big upgrade defensively at second base and as a dude in the clubhouse, an experienced guy, a level-headed guy who can now bat more toward the end or the second or third tier of the lineup and maybe get his offensive game back together after hitting some struggles in his last couple of years in Texas. So I really like that move. Bichette. I mean, it's people underrate the ability to hit. I understand batting average, isn't as in vogue as it used to be, but a dude who can move the baseball, as they say. Here's a guy with 181 hits last year, has twice led the AL in hits, has a .330 career batting average with runners in scoring position. You put that guy behind Juan Soto, because it's interesting. One of the not great criticisms, but a consistent criticism of Soto is he walks too much. If that's a bad thing, we've all committed much worse sins. But you put a hit machine behind an on-base machine like that, that's very, very nice look there for the Mets. And then, the kind of the cherry on top with Peralta this past week, I like a guy who can make the entire rest of the rotation better per se. Not to say that he distributes the ball or anything like that, but it takes a load off of Nolan McLean, off of Tong if he figures in, off of Holmes, who's still a converted reliever, and then off of some injury guys, the Sean Meneas and the Kodai Sengas. All of a sudden you're not counting on 150 to 170 innings out of 4 or 5 of those guys. Now it's like you can kind of make it more of a group effort if Peralta goes out and gives you his usual 180 innings with a low 3 ERA. That's makes them definitely a threat. I'd kind of like term them the co-favorites in the East. For as much agita as there is in Philly over their last couple playoffs. Really, really good team last year that won that division. And, they didn't do a ton, but I think, they're a really good team to begin with. So that all of a sudden becomes a really great race in the NL East.
Yeah. One other thing, you mentioned Marcus Semien they brought in and you said he's a clear upgrade, middle of the infield shortstop. But what I want to ask you about, or I'm sorry, second base, you mentioned, they have Lindor to play shortstop, but one of the defensive things that I'm concerned about for the Mets, and this was something that Stearns mentioned, he wanted to get better defensively. He brings in Bo Bichette, who's going to play third base, and Polanco, who we talked about, to play first base. Neither of those two men have played those positions. So to me, if your emphasis is to improve the defense, to then go and put players at positions they've never played before, that seems like something that could backfire on you. What's your take on that?
Yeah, not ideal, certainly. And maybe, maybe that was Stearns kind of covering for the fact that he just wanted to change the mix a little bit, Now, certainly Luis Robert kind of justifies that nicely. Like, okay, that's where our defensive upgrade will be, at least defensive upgrade with also like a passable offensive, person in center, assuming he stays healthy. Yeah, Bichette at third is going to be interesting, but I think it's going to be okay. He's not, he doesn't have a great arm, but he has enough arm. He works extremely hard at his craft, and he's got, a lot of guys to lean on there who have, done, Semien also had to convert from being, as you mentioned, from being a shortstop to a second baseman. It's not that he's a third baseman per se, but, Brett Beatty's still going to be around. A lot of guys that you can sort of use as resources. I think it's going to be all right. It's a little funky, and you're going to see some hops and some angles and stuff that might take a little bit of time to adjust. But Bichette really gets after it with regard to work ethic and doing what he needs to do to get himself ready to play. Really thrives on preparation, so he's not going to want to go out there naked. So it's it's late January, not quite late January. So he's got 2-3 weeks before camp. He's got an entire spring training. Might see some early season hiccups at third, but I think, by the time you get around to Memorial Day, he'll look smooth and normal out there.
Yeah. We'll have to see how that all comes together for the Mets. I want to jump over to the AL East. Let's start with the Toronto Blue Jays, of course, fresh off their appearance in the World Series. Now, they made an emphasis to try to improve that starting pitching, as well as a little bit of the back end in the bullpen. Their big prize was Dylan Cease. They brought Cody Ponce back from Japan, solidified the back end I mentioned with Tyler Rogers. Do you like what they were able to get done? Do you like that philosophy by the Blue Jays to try to, strengthen that pitching staff? And do you expect them to, once again, be the cream of the crop in the AL?
Yeah, interesting. They're kind of the reverse Mets. They jumped on guys at the start of the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like ages ago they pulled in Cease and Ponce. Yeah, it makes sense because you're losing Max Scherzer, you're losing Chris Bassett, Kevin Gausman is going into his walk year. So I like a team that thinks not just this year, but also able to think both for this year and years ahead. So all of a sudden you got Dylan Cease able to kind of be the bulwark that Kevin Gausman is now. Interesting how you analyze Cease's stuff. The stuff looks great. The numbers haven't been great, but the strikeout rate is there. So you kind of hope that he somehow avoids bats a little more effectively, in terms of hard hit balls, stuff like that. The whip has been a little bit out of pocket. So it's, not not exactly like we're getting an ace, but also a guy that can shut you down. Even if his playoff showings in Chicago and San Diego haven't exactly borne that out, the stuff is there. His story isn't fully written yet, so really nice sign there. I really think they could have used Bichette or Tucker, one way or the other. It doesn't feel like they're short in any sense, but we were just talking about Bichette's ability to keep the line moving, advance guys on the bases and all that. That's a pretty significant loss. And to me, the three key guys this year, in a sense, now you're relying a lot more on Okamoto, who is not just sort of like a nice depth add. He's going to get an awful lot of at bats. And then you look back at their postseason success with Addison Barger and Ernie Clement. Those guys were, phenomenal in October. And, they've never done that or, anything close to that over 162 games. You're not going to expect Ernie Clement to get 30 hits in 15 games for forever. But if he can, continue to play well and continue to, to kind of be an offensive threat at the bottom of the lineup. And then Barger, still a young player, nice left-handed power bat. There's still steps forward that he can make. And obviously you saw that with a couple of huge postseason home runs. But, if Tucker or Bichette were in the picture, those three guys would be like, okay, in the aggregate there, they're going to give us what we need. Now you're leaning on them a little more heavily. So I'm curious to see just how well that works out for them and how much more, those guys can step up over the course of 162 games.
Yeah. A lot of action going on in the AL East. Of course, we talked about some of the moves the Blue Jays made. The Baltimore was real busy. Pete Alonso, of course, Taylor Ward. Boston was busy bringing in some pitching. But I do want to ask you about the Yankees. Not a typical offseason for the Yankees. They did get their big prize, Cody Bellinger. That stand down kind of went on and on for a while there, but they eventually get it done. What I'm curious to get your thoughts on, I think a lot of the fans, myself included, are a little concerned. I know they won 94 games last year, but there's some concern out there with the fact that it seems like they're running it back with the same team they had last year. Of course, they're going to get Cole at some point this year, but do you have any concerns about that? I mean, the Yankees really didn't make any real significant moves other than to bring Bellinger back. Would you be concerned at all in Yankee land?
Yeah, a little bit, just because, you're running it back with a team that I don't want to say they absolutely maxed out with regard to production from guys, but certainly, a lot of things that maybe they weren't, you gave them some truth serum. They probably weren't counting on, Trent Grisham hitting 34 home runs, probably weren't totally counting on Cody Bellinger, being healthy and productive for 152 games. That was a big step forward for him after, just a couple of really debilitating years back in LA. He's kind of been building himself back up. So yeah, there is some concern that way. Did they get better or did they just maintain with a team that had some guys close to their apex? Don't love the offseason with regard to how some of the other superpowers are doing things, but at the same time, they're also staying away from, locking in from, staying away from contracts that might lock the roster down too much in future years. Held the line on Bellinger to 5 years. I think one thing that might have been in the back of their minds was, having to get, cut loose DJ LeMahieu at the, I guess that was the midpoint or so of last year. You got to pay him for a year and a half, which you kind of figured was going to happen. That looked like very much a deal to keep the average annual value of his deal down a bit by extending it over more years. But that said, you get Bellinger at 5 years instead of 6 or 7. That's a nice bit of roster flexibility going forward. So, not to say that the Mets are going to run into problems. I mean, they're spending big money on short-term deals. It's a really interesting way they're going about it. There's really no reason on paper that the Yankees can't run it back and win 94 again. But slippage definitely seems possible. And a guy that we don't talk about a lot. Everybody's kind of fixating on Garrett Cole's return, and it'll probably take a couple minutes for him to ramp totally up. But Carlos Rodón, how is he going to look? I think he's coming back end of May, somewhere in there. But is he going to hit the ground running, from his procedure over the offseason, or will he need, 3 or 4 or 5 starts to really round into form? Because he's been quietly very big for them the last couple of years. So that's a couple of question marks that maybe, can Ryan Weathers and Will Warren hold down the fort? Until then, we'll see. But it's, there's definitely some vulnerability and a decided non-aggressive stance. It may work out for him, but there are certainly, I think your concerns are pretty valid.
Now, you mentioned some of the traditional superpowers, so I do want to ask you about that before I let you run. In the wake of the Kyle Tucker deal, of course, the Dodgers come out of nowhere, sign him to this mega deal, blow everyone's offers out of the water, $240 million. We know the possibility of the work stoppage. And I think about the way things have been trending in the last couple of years where the Dodgers, not doing anything against the rules, but deferring all this money, just kind of maybe finding a loophole in the system. Do you think that this latest move by the Dodgers has united owners across the league even more so than maybe they already were, and that you think there's no doubt in your mind that they're going to be pushing for a salary cap 100%? There's no doubt about it. What's some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, wouldn't it be funny if Kyle Tucker was the contract that broke the camel's back, of all people? Not that he's not a great player, it's just funny. So somebody has to be the number one free agent in every offseason, and it was him. So there's a lot of attention on him. In another winter, it might have been like, less of a spotlight, but what have you. But that being said, I mean, it gives them an entry point to kind of wail about things on the other end of the spectrum. Kyle Tucker does not affect in any way the manner in which the Pirates or the Reds or the Brewers or anybody else would have gone about their business. The fact that it went to one team, that, all this talent's going to one team is concerning in a sense, but the Dodgers are also a remarkably well-run operation. And, also a pretty good example of the concept simply of spending money to make money.
Yeah.
I don't think they could have imagined the windfall that Shohei Ohtani has brought them. And they take, a lot of guff about the deferrals. It was Ohtani who presented them the salary structure, and they said, sure, so it's not like they're flouting the rules. It's not like they're looking to be, totally weaselly about it. And they just, they happen to win. And I don't want to say happen to win, because obviously they're incredibly talented, but how uncertain the playoffs are. And, lo and behold, they had to play in the wild card round. You're talking about this evil empire relegated to having to beat the Reds 2 out of 3, to even get into the main draw. So it's not like they have the market cornered on competition. It's not like there's other routes to go. Can the owners come up with 23 people who would die on salary cap hill? I don't know. I can think of 2 that maybe wouldn't be into it because they're still spending plenty of money and not being worried about it. So it's very tricky, and that's not to minimize the concerns that other markets have. And I won't say small market, because this is the big leagues, and there's no Mayberries here, right? There are lower revenue markets as opposed to larger revenue markets, and their concerns are certainly valid. At the same time, I think we've seen just so many examples of ways to win, other than just simply going out and buying people, and how that doesn't necessarily work out all the time. And is just flattening the landscape the answer? You could bring a salary cap in, and the Pirates could spend nothing and not have, competent upper management, and nothing would change. Okay, maybe with a floor, they might have to spend a few more bucks, but if you're paying Jared Triolo $2 million instead of $1 million, that's really does that do anything better to make them a better team? Your fans are still as hopeless as they were without a cap. So I'm interested to see how it turns out, how it unfolds, and if the owners can kind of form a consensus on that.
Yeah, there's a lot to hash out. My advice to baseball fans out there is enjoy this upcoming season, because when the collective bargaining agreement expires December 1st, 2026, we could be in store for a work stoppage that could trickle into the start of the season. So I'm going to sit back, I'm going to relax, I'm going to enjoy it, and I expect everyone else to do the same. Gabe Lacques, everybody, thank you so much for your time, and we always appreciate your insight. Thank you so much today.
All right. Appreciate you having me on for sure.